Have you ever imagined a tiny being, from a species barely 2 feet tall, mastering crystal energies so powerful they could stand shoulder to shoulder with a human? In this story, the most thrilling moment comes when two unlikely allies combine their powers in a burst of dazzling resonance to drive back colossal, razor-scaled beasts threatening an entire village. This breathtaking showdown changes them both forever and proves that trust can transcend even the widest gaps in size and culture. Curious to know how a tiny, frightened alien and a seasoned human officer forged such a mighty bond? Stick around and listen to the complete tale. We guarantee it's an adventure you don't want to miss. If you love stories brimming with courage, unity, and unexpected transformations, remember to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more unique adventures from across the galaxy and beyond. Jackson Wynn had reached the point where he just needed to step away from the barrage of mission updates and intelligence briefs. 6 months on the frontier planet, Astron had proven more taxing than any previous assignment he'd undertaken for the Earth Special Operations Division. The never-ending stream of scouting logs, resource allocation lists, and environmental hazard alerts made him feel like he was drowning in data. Standing in the main corridor of the outpost, he rolled the stiffness from his shoulders and swept a hand through his short, somewhat messy black hair, an unintentional style created by the dryness of Astron's atmosphere. His slender comm device strapped to his wrist flashed multiple notifications, but he ignored them. This was supposed to be his reprieve, if only for a few hours. "Going off the grid for a bit, Commander," Lieutenant Delgado teased from behind a console. The older officer's salt and pepper hair was cropped close, and a half-smirk played on his lips as he surveyed Jackson's posture. Delgado understood the drive to push oneself in active duty, but even the best needed a reset now and then. "Maybe a short walk to clear your head before the next wave of reports hits?" "Precisely," Jackson replied with a tired grin. "You know how these screens can burn holes in your retinas if you stare long enough. I'm too fond of my eyesight to sacrifice it for another pointless briefing on how many crates of rations we have in storage." A set of security gates sealed off the outpost from Astron's wilderness, a measure put in place after a handful of dangerous fauna encounters in the early days of colonization. The thick, reinforced doors were painted in a muted teal and emblazoned with the Earth Special Ops emblem, a stylized eagle perched on a planet's ring. Once outside, Jackson inhaled deeply, savoring the faint floral scent that pervaded the damp air. Astron's landscapes were like a vivid dream, towering violet trees draped with bioluminescent vines and wide patches of grass that glowed faintly at dusk. The terrain had a magnetism that lured him deeper every time he ventured out. Jackson's standard-issue stealth suit conformed to his lean, yet muscular build, accentuating the broad lines of his shoulders and the taper of his waist. A ring of indigo lights around his collar flickered softly, an indicator that the suit's environmental filters were at moderate power, mostly to shield him from Astron's occasional toxic spores. The path he chose today snaked through a portion of the jungle known for its exotic flora and nearly translucent mushrooms. He found a certain tranquility there. The only sounds were the soft hum of insects that thrived in neon canopies and the sizzle of fungal spores bursting on the damp ground. Occasionally, he'd pause to examine a plant or rock formation, letting his gaze slide over the luminous patterns. Each discovered detail was a reminder of how vast and varied the galaxy could be. He'd grown up on Earth with stories of lush alien worlds, but living amid one was a different experience altogether. Jackson was just about to move deeper into the undergrowth, taking note of the thick vines overhead, when he spotted what looked like a small figure lying at the base of a glowing tree. His heartbeat quickened. This was no mere critter, it was something or someone clearly sentient. Crouching low, Jackson crept closer, making sure not to startle whatever being lay before him. Even so, the figure was barely 2 feet tall. At first, he thought he must be hallucinating from overwork or the effect of Astron's unique spores. But as he brushed aside the thick leaves, he was certain. He'd found a small, sapient alien lying unconscious among the glowing roots of a giant vine tree. She had lavender skin and delicate features, complete with large, dark eyes that were shut tight. Her hair, tied back in a neat ponytail, was a paler shade of lavender, nearly translucent under the forest glow. She wore what looked like a metallized outfit, some hybrid between armor and a decorative ensemble that shimmered with its own subdued light. For a moment, he just knelt there, watching the gentle rise and fall of her tiny chest. Instinct urged him to ensure she was still alive, so he placed two fingers lightly against the side of her neck. The soft warmth of her skin and the faint pulse of blood, if it was blood, told him she was, in fact, breathing. Relieved, he carefully slid one hand beneath her upper body and the other under her knees, picking her up with utmost caution. She was feather-light in his arms, yet more solid than he expected. His special ops training had drilled into him that caution was crucial in first contact scenarios. Even so, he found himself captivated by the diminutive alien's form. He'd studied countless species encountered by Earth explorers, but none that resembled a tiny, lavender-hued human so closely. A swirl of excitement and worry churned in his stomach. He was trained as a soldier and an analyst, not a xenobiologist. Was she injured? Were there others nearby? He scanned the perimeter but saw only the flicker of glowing foliage. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes of shimmering bronze flecked with star-like specks. For a split second, she stared at him with a look of pure astonishment. Then, and as if recoiling from an unspeakable horror, she let out a high-pitched yelp. Her voice was melodic, almost like a wind chime caught in a gust, but the fear in it was palpable. She jerked in his arms, her tiny hands pressing against his chest in a futile effort to push him away. Don't eat me," she cried, panic coloring every syllable. I'm not tasty, I promise. Our folklore says giant outsiders devour little Kesh like me." Her face scrunched in terror, and Jackson's heart squeezed with both sympathy and a flicker of unexpected amusement at the notion. Gently, he set her down on a small clearing where a bed of glowing moss offered a soft landing spot. "Relax," he said, his tone measured and calm. "I'm not going to eat you." He raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Jackson Wynn, commander in the Earth Special Operations Division. You're Kesh?" He tested the word on his tongue, gleaned from her fearful exclamation. Her panicked expression softened, but she remained wary. "I am Yuno," she replied in a trembling voice. "I've never met a human. Why are you so big?" Jackson couldn't help the gentle smile that crept across his face. She seemed genuinely perplexed by his height, though from his perspective, she was the anomalous one. "Size can be relative," he offered, keeping his voice low to avoid startling her. He slowly moved a step back so she'd have more space. "On Earth, my home planet, I'm considered fairly normal in height. I've never encountered your species before, but I promise humans don't eat other intelligent beings. At least, not in any sanctioned manner." He punctuated the remark with a casual shrug, which earned a wary giggle from Yuno. You're certain?" She eyed him with large bronze eyes that still glimmered with fear, but also curiosity. Her posture shifted as she sat up, her slender arms curled around her knees. The metallic scraps of her outfit, some variant of protective gear, he presumed, reflected Astron's phosphorescent flora. "Absolutely certain," Jackson replied. He tilted his head, observing her more thoroughly now that she was awake. "You said your people are called the Kesh?" "Yes," Yuno confirmed. "We've lived on Astron for as long as our stories go back. Most of us avoid contact with the large off-worlders who set up outposts. Some of my elders say you mean no harm, while others are sure you'll eventually claim all we cherish, including our lives." She shrugged those tiny shoulders, looking uneasy. "Our myths are muddled, but they often paint a grim picture of giant outsiders. I only came this far from my settlement to gather starlight moss, which we use for healing in my village. I must have slipped on a root and hit my head." Her hand went to her temple, massaging it gingerly. Jackson immediately went on alert. "Do you feel any dizziness or pain? You were unconscious when I found you." "A bit of throbbing, but it's not unbearable," Yuno replied. She cast her gaze around the area. "Where's my bag? I dropped it. It's small and woven from shimmering fibers. It carries starlight moss that glows white." He scanned the vicinity. A short distance away, near the trunk of a towering purple tree, lay a diminutive pouch that emitted a faint glow. "Is that it over there?" he asked, pointing toward it. Yuno stood, wobbling slightly but managing to keep her balance. "Yes, that's mine," she exclaimed, relief momentarily overriding her apprehension. Jackson strode over in two long steps, retrieved the pouch with careful fingers, and brought it back, placing it gently into her tiny hands. She nodded gratefully and clutched it to her chest. "Are you certain you're all right to travel?" Jackson asked, concern threading his tone. "I'm no field medic, but I've got some training in basic first aid. If you're feeling dizzy, I could carry you back to your settlement. I'm sure your people have more advanced healing methods for your species, but I'd be happy to help in any way I can." Yuno bit her lower lip. Her eyes were filled with conflicting emotions. "I don't want to alarm my settlement by arriving in a giant's arms, but would you mind sitting with me until the throbbing subsides? I'm nervous about collapsing again." Jackson settled onto a fallen log, checking that it was stable before he sat down. He gestured for Yuno to find a seat wherever she felt comfortable, but she merely took a few cautious steps closer to him. Seeing her up close, he noticed the subtle pattern of faint stripes that adorned her arms, lavender on lavender, nearly imperceptible unless one was paying close attention. It gave her skin a unique texture that shimmered under Astron's ambient light. "So, you really thought I was going to eat you?" he asked, trying to break the tension with a gentle inquiry. A soft breeze rustled the hanging vines, and in the distance an avian creature gave a low, melodic call, adding a touch of serenade to the moment. Yuno let out a shy, musical laugh. "We have old legends, Commander Wynne, tales of monstrous beings that stand many times taller than us. They supposedly scoop up Kesh children and devour them in single bites. To be fair, you do look capable of plucking me off the ground in one hand." "Well, I did sort of do that," Jackson admitted, remembering how he had picked her up. "But eating you was never on the agenda. I'm glad we've cleared that up." Despite the levity, he could still see concern in her gaze. He wondered what life must be like for the Kesh, living in secrecy and fear of a world beyond their size. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'm stationed here at Outpost Astron 1, not too far from here, for a few more months. My team and I study potential threats, assist in scientific research, and keep an eye out for any anomalies on this planet. But honestly, I've never even heard rumors about the Kesh. If you usually keep hidden, you do it well." Her cheeks warmed to a deeper purple hue. "We thrive among the star shard formations that are scattered through the forests. They help power our villages and provide us with healing and communication capabilities. The big off-worlders, like you, mostly ignore those areas because the shards are too unstable to be used in your technology. That's why we're rarely discovered. Truth be told, we'd all prefer it that way." Jackson nodded. "I can understand the desire for privacy. Humanity has had its share of complicated first contacts. Sometimes the bigger civilization inadvertently tramples over the smaller one. It's a tragic pattern in our history." Yuno swallowed hard, the starlight moss bag clutched tightly against her. "I'm not naive about how these things can turn out. But you do seem different. You didn't immediately summon your squad or treat me like some exotic specimen. Instead, you worried about my well-being. Perhaps some of our elders were too quick to paint you as terrifying giants. Maybe they forgot there could be gentler souls among the stars." A comfortable silence followed her words. Jackson felt an odd rush of warmth, a sense of connection. He'd only just met this tiny being, yet he felt compelled to protect her, almost as if some gravitational pull had anchored him to her presence. He cleared his throat and looked away, trying to mask the growing flush on his own face. "I'm glad you're feeling better," he said softly. "It's not every day I make a new friend who's half the size of my forearm." Astron's sun had begun its slow descent, shifting the forest palette from a bright violet glow to deeper, duskier shades. Bioluminescent leaves brightened in response to the fading daylight, creating an enchanting atmosphere that pulsed in soft waves. The luminescent vines overhead took on a gentle sway, like living chandeliers suspended among the branches. Jackson, still sitting on the log, found himself entranced by the forest's shifting colors. It was like witnessing an otherworldly symphony, each plant participating in a grand illumination. Yuno grew visibly more relaxed as the minutes passed. Though she kept a bit of distance, she was close enough now that Jackson could see the curiosity dancing in her eyes. At one point, she lightly touched the side of his stealth suit, running her tiny fingers over the futuristic fabric as if to test whether it was truly real. "Your attire, ma'am, it's so smooth yet firm," she said in wonder. "It must be built to protect you from Astron's many hazards." "It is," Jackson confirmed, taking a moment to explain. "It's a specialized suit designed to shield me from toxins, extreme temperatures, and minor impacts. Earth's technology has come a long way, especially for frontiers like this one." She tilted her head, her ponytail swaying. "Would it repel a razor scale's claws?" The question was casual, but Jackson caught the flash of worry in her eyes. She looked away for a moment, as if regretting bringing it up too soon. "Razor scale," he repeated. "I haven't heard of that creature. Must be a native predator?" Yuno hesitated, biting her lip before answering. "Yes, they roam the deeper parts of Astron's wilderness. They're large, about the size of your people. Their bodies are covered in crystal-like scales, what we call star shard scales that can slice through most materials. They're dangerous if provoked, but for the longest time, they stayed clear of Kesh villages. Lately, though, they've become more aggressive." Her shoulders sagged, and her entire demeanor shifted. "A few days ago, they attacked our village's outskirts. Some of our people were hurt, and one of our children was taken." A surge of compassion and anger rippled through Jackson at the thought of these small beings suffering such a loss. "I'm truly sorry to hear that," he said. "Have you reached out to the outpost or any of the scientific teams here on Astron? Perhaps they could help." She shook her head vigorously, a strand of lavender hair slipping loose. "No, we haven't. Most Kesh are terrified of large outsiders. We prefer secrecy, and we don't trust that your solutions would truly protect us, or that they wouldn't come with a hidden cost to our people. Our elders debated approaching you, but most concluded it was too great a risk. We've tried to handle the razor scales ourselves, but—" She broke off, eyes glistening with frustration. Jackson leaned in, a hand pressed gently to his chest. "If it helps, I'll do what I can. I promise. I can look into these razor scales. I have resources at the outpost, sensors, drones, maybe even specialized weaponry that could help. But I won't do anything without discussing it with you and your elders first." Yuno exhaled, relief mingling with lingering anxiety. "I appreciate the offer, Jackson Wynn. Truly. But I need to speak with my elders first. They must decide if they want an outsider's help and how to proceed. I only have a small say in such matters, despite being a gatherer for the village. But maybe if they see that not all humans are monstrous—" She trailed off, a hopeful note in her voice. Jackson nodded. "That's understandable. I can meet with them, show them we're not here to dominate or exploit. I can see how protective you are of your home." He paused, studying Yuno's diminutive form. The protective instinct he felt toward her was growing stronger with every moment. "Let's be practical about it. If you head back now, is it safe to travel alone? The sun's setting, and you mentioned creatures like the razor scales." "I'll be okay," she reassured him, though the tremor in her voice indicated otherwise. "I know hidden paths, and the razor scales rarely come this close to the off-worlder's boundary." She stood up, bag in hand, the soft glow from its starlight moss highlighting her determined expression. "Tomorrow at midday, come back here. I'll speak with the elders tonight. If they allow, I'll bring you deeper into our territory." "Deal," Jackson said. He reached into a small pouch on his belt and retrieved a first aid band. Breaking it open, he revealed a thin strip that activated into a cooling gel patch. He knelt, carefully pressing it across Yuno's forehead. "I might not be a full medic," he said with a half-smile, "but this should help with the throbbing until you can get proper treatment." Yuno's eyes widened in surprise and gratitude at the soothing sensation. "You have no idea how this might impress our healers," she murmured. "Thank you for everything." She bowed her head. Then, with a final nod, she slipped into the undergrowth, her form disappearing among neon moss and swirling spores. For a long moment, Jackson remained where he was, gazing at the spot where she had vanished. Thoughts tumbled in his mind like dice in a cup. Part of him wondered if exhaustion had conjured a vivid dream, But then he glanced down and noticed some scattered purple leaves had been disturbed by her footsteps. This was real. Rising from the log, he scanned the forest one last time, ensuring no immediate danger lurked. The day's light was now almost fully gone, and he activated the night vision on his stealth suit. The forest became a swirl of greens and blues, revealing the subtle contours of plants and trees that had previously been cloaked by darkness. He walked back toward the outpost with renewed purpose, every step echoing a silent vow. He would come back tomorrow, as promised. And if Yuno and her people needed help, he'd find a way to offer it, no matter how daunting the threat might be. For the first time in weeks, Jackson felt that the endless data and mission parameters had a real, tangible meaning. He couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. Back at the outpost, Jackson did his best to seem composed when Lieutenant Delgado greeted him with a curious arch of an eyebrow. The older man's gaze flicked to the numerous stray leaves clinging to Jackson's boots and pants. "Rough stroll, Commander?" "You could say that," Jackson replied, forcing an even tone. He peeled a leaf off his thigh, recalling how it still shimmered faintly in the outpost's sterile lighting. "The forest is denser than I remember, and I found something interesting." Delgado narrowed his eyes, intrigued. "Want to elaborate, or is this classified?" Jackson hesitated, measuring the weight of what he'd witnessed. Protocols existed for all first contact scenarios, but he also knew how red tape could worsen the Kesh's already precarious situation. "Let's just say I stumbled on evidence of a smaller native population we weren't aware of, but they may not want direct contact with Han right now. I need to meet them halfway, see what they need." A grin tugged at Delgado's features. Sometimes forging new alliances is as important as following standard procedures. "Let me know if you need any backup. I can arrange a small squad if the situation calls for it." "I appreciate it, but let me handle this quietly first," Jackson replied. "They're shy, to put it mildly." He gave Delgado a respectful nod and then made his way to his personal quarters, mindful of the swirling questions in his head. Should he file a formal first contact report? Should he mention the looming threat of these razor scales in his daily briefing? He resolved to wait until after tomorrow's meeting with Yuno. If he could gain the trust of her elders, perhaps a more collaborative approach could be established. Slipping into his cramped living quarters, he set aside his stealth suit and rummaged through some gear. A few scanning devices, a portable translator, and emergency rations. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added a small gift from Earth, a polished piece of quartz from his home region. It wasn't especially valuable, but maybe the Kesh would appreciate the friendly gesture. Exhaustion eventually claimed him, and he sank onto his bunk, the overhead light casting a muted glow across the room. He dreamed of violet forests and tiny silhouettes dancing among giant star-shaped flowers. In that dream, Yuno's voice reached him like a whisper across the cosmos. "Are you sure you won't devour me?" He laughed in the dream, and somewhere between sleep and waking, he found himself strangely touched by the memory of her timid smile. When morning came, he awoke with renewed determination. After all, the day's tasks loomed large: a meeting with a hidden civilization, the possibility of forging an unprecedented bond, and the threat of a dangerous creature known as the razor scale. Stepping out of his quarters, he found Delgado eyeing him again, but this time with a silent nod of encouragement. Armed with his equipment and a cautious hope, Jackson headed back into the wilderness. A faint sense of anticipation thrummed in his veins. He was about to uncover a secret that could reshape humanity's relationship with Astron forever. Jackson awoke before dawn the next day, a hint of adrenaline buzzing beneath his skin. He'd prepared thoroughly the night before, laying out gear that might prove useful if Yuno's village gave him the go-ahead to help with the razor scale problem. He also downloaded a more portable translation module, just in case her elders preferred to speak in the Kesh language. After a quick bite at the outpost mess hall, a bland protein bar, and a cup of synth coffee, he checked in with Lieutenant Delgado. The older officer raised an eyebrow at the early hour but made no comment, handing Jackson a small drone kit with a wink. It was Delgado's wordless way of offering quiet support. With the drone kit and his personal first aid supplies in tow, Jackson slipped out of the outpost just as the sky began to lighten. The forest at dawn was a different creature than at dusk. The swirling mist glowed faintly in the pinkish light, and dew-laden leaves shimmered as if bedazzled with tiny diamonds. The path was still damp, and Jackson tread carefully, mindful of how easily a patch of slippery moss could drop him flat on his back. His heart thudded with anticipation. Would Yuno actually be there? Or had his hopes of forging a peaceful alliance been dashed overnight by fearful elders? As he neared the spot where they'd first met, he found himself instinctively slowing, scanning the undergrowth with heightened caution. In the distance, a cluster of luminous white flowers trembled. Then, a small figure emerged. Even from 10 yards away, he recognized Yuno's lavender complexion and her neatly tied ponytail. She glanced around nervously before stepping forward, visibly relaxing when she saw it was him. "You came," she said softly, a warm lilt in her voice. Her gaze flicked to the equipment strapped around his shoulders, a small backpack loaded with tools and the drone kit. "I was half afraid you wouldn't." "I said I would," Jackson replied, offering a reassuring smile. "Besides, I'm not the type to leave a friend waiting in the jungle." Her cheeks turned a soft shade of purple in what he assumed was a Kesh version of a blush. "We're not quite friends yet, if you ask my people," she said, folding her arms across her metallic chest piece. "But my elders did agree to a cautious meeting. They want to see what you can do, how you handle yourself, and whether you truly have honorable intentions. I told them about how you tended my head wound and how gently you spoke to me." He noticed a flash of relief in her eyes, tempered with worry. "I'll do everything in my power to prove myself," he assured her. "My only concern is your village's safety." Yuno swallowed, shoulders tensing. "We'd better hurry. It's a decent walk to our outer boundary, and the elders don't like to be kept waiting." She gestured for him to follow, her pace swift and sure-footed. As Jackson fell into step behind her, he couldn't help but notice that although she was only 2 feet tall, her presence felt far larger. Something about her confidence and concern for her people commanded respect far beyond her diminutive stature. They navigated through a section of forest where star-shaped shrubs glowed in faint turquoise and pink patterns. Jackson found it mesmerizing, but Yuno hardly spared them a glance. She seemed wholly focused on the path ahead, occasionally stopping to check for signs of danger. More than once, she put a tiny hand up, silently motioning for him to pause. Only after a tense moment of listening to the rustle of leaves would she beckon him forward again. Whatever threatened the Kesh had her on high alert. Finally, they reached a steep incline of craggy rock that overlooked a small canyon. Below them, Jackson saw a breathtaking sight, a cluster of crystalline structures that glimmered even in the morning's subdued light. At first, he thought they were naturally occurring formations, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized these were buildings, tiny spires and towers crafted from translucent minerals, connected by bridges of woven fiber. Here and there, flickers of color raced across the crystal surfaces, as though responding to an unseen pulse. "That's my home," Yuno said, her voice laced with a complex mix of pride and anxiety. "We've grown it over generations using our bond with the star shard crystals. We channel their energy, shaping them for our needs. These crystals are alive in their own way. They communicate with us if we listen carefully." Jackson let out a low whistle, astonished by the interplay of art and nature. The Kesh settlement blended seamlessly with the canyon walls, and the star-like shrubs growing on the cliffs all added a protective camouflage. "It's beautiful," he murmured, "and very well hidden." Yuno turned to him, bronze-flecked eyes serious. "We keep to ourselves for good reasons. But now the razor scales have pushed us to consider the unthinkable, asking for off-worlder assistance. Some of our elders believe it's riskier not to seek help, while others think allowing a giant to walk among us is a betrayal of centuries of caution." "I'm grateful you spoke in favor of me," Jackson said, placing a hand over his chest in a gesture of respect. "I hope I can prove their trust isn't misplaced." They descended a narrow path cut into the rock. It was precariously small by Jackson's standards, forcing him to move sideways and duck beneath outcroppings that were just the right height for Yuno. With every careful step, his boots dislodged tiny stones that clattered down the cliff face. Even the smallest misstep would be painful, if not dangerous. Yet Yuno walked with unwavering balance as though the path were an open highway. Halfway down, she paused at a stone platform ringed by glowing runes. Pressing her palm against a crystal plate set into the rock, she murmured something in her language. A moment later, the plate shimmered and the rune's glow intensified. Then, to Jackson's astonishment, the entire platform began to lower like a lift, taking them the rest of the way into the canyon. "You really are masters of crystal engineering," Jackson remarked, balancing himself on the lowering platform. The gentle hum of energy beneath his feet made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "I've never seen technology like this." Yuno managed a small smile. "This is only a fraction of our capabilities. Perhaps today you'll understand more." They stepped off the lift into what appeared to be the village's outer courtyard, a flat, crystalline expanse dotted with various sculptures that looked functional rather than merely decorative. Several Kesh milled about, pausing in startled silence at the sight of Jackson. He towered over them, each small figure bedecked in some combination of woven fibers and tiny crystal shards. A few scampered away in alarm, while others watched warily from behind intricately carved pillars. An older Kesh woman approached, leaning on a staff. Her lavender skin was pale, and a tight coil of silver hair circled the crown of her head. A swirling pattern of gemstones adorned the collar of her robe. She bowed slightly to Jackson, then glanced at Yuno. "Child, you've indeed brought an outsider within our walls. The rumors are true." With a shaky breath, Yuno gestured toward the older woman. "This is Elder Nalta. She oversees our healing wards and is one of the council members who voted to hear your proposal, Jackson." Lowering himself to one knee to appear less imposing, Jackson placed his hand over his chest once more. "I'm honored to meet you, Elder Nalta." She studied him with sharp, inquisitive eyes, then lifted her staff. In a clear voice that echoed across the courtyard, she announced, "Make way! The council has decreed a meeting in the Grand Chamber. All who can attend shall witness this exchange." A hush fell over the area, and several more Kesh emerged, their expressions a mixture of fear, curiosity, and skepticism. Elder Nalta led the way through a tall archway carved from a single piece of translucent crystal, the flickering lights within dancing like captured fireflies. Jackson followed, taking care not to accidentally knock into the delicate spires or the smaller Kesh who parted around him. They entered a domed hall where 5 elaborate thrones carved from star-shard crystal stood in a semicircle. Each throne was shaped uniquely, as though designed to reflect the personality or role of its occupant. Along the chamber's periphery, lesser council members and village notables gathered, whispering among themselves. Yuno stood to one side, hands folded in front of her. Elder Nalta took her place on one of the central thrones, leaning her staff against it. One by one, the other council elders arrived. Elder Vero, a stoic-looking Kesh with intricate face markings, settled into a throne etched with swirling lines. Another elder, wearing a thick robe decorated with miniature star-shard crystals, gazed at Jackson with unmasked suspicion. When all 5 were present, Elder Nalta gestured for silence. The chamber's acoustics were extraordinary. Even a faint murmur carried clearly, so absolute stillness fell fast. "Commander Jackson Wynn," Nalta began, her resonant voice filling the space. "You are the first human to stand before this council. You claim you wish to assist us against the Razor Scales. Yet how are we to know you won't turn that power upon us once our enemy is beaten? Our history warns us that the large races often seek only to conquer." Jackson met her gaze. "I have no interest in conquest. My people at the outpost aren't here to rule. We're assigned to study Astron's environment and ensure it poses no significant threat. I'm here on my own accord because Yuno told me of your plight. I want to help, for your sake and for the sake of peace between our worlds." Elder Varro leaned forward, his face shadowed by the overhead lighting. He pinned Jackson with a hard stare. "Words are cheap, outsider. You stand in our sacred chamber, proclaiming friendship. But we've seen how your kind brings advanced weapons and large structures to weaker civilizations." A ripple of agreement passed among the onlookers, some nodding vigorously. Jackson recognized this distrust. It was the same he had read about in old Earth history texts, where colonial powers overcame indigenous people with superior technology. He needed to convey sincerity without arrogance. Taking a measured breath, he reached into his backpack, retrieving the polished quartz piece he'd brought from Earth. Slowly, he placed it on the chamber floor. This isn't a weapon. It's a piece of my homeworld. A simple quartz stone shaped and polished by my family long ago. They gave it to me when I was first assigned to off-world duty to remind me of Earth. I offer it to you as a symbol that I come not with bombs or blasters, but with a willingness to share and learn. Elder Nalta's eyes narrowed, but she waved her staff, and a young Kesh approached to pick up the quartz. The youth presented it to the council. Nalta took it, examining the way it caught the ambient light. She passed it to Elder Vero, who ran his palm across its smooth surface, his expression unchanging. Another elder tapped the quartz, making it chime softly. While this silent inspection went on, Jackson chanced a glance at Yuno. She stood taut, watching the exchange with a mix of hope and apprehension. When Nalta set the quartz aside, all eyes returned to Jackson. "A token," she said softly, her voice echoing in the grand dome. "It shows respect, at least. But gestures alone won't eliminate the threat we face." In that moment, Yuno stepped forward, respectfully bowing to the elders. "Forgive me, but the razor scales have grown bolder by the day. Yesterday, one nearly breached our main bridge before a watch patrol drove it off. More are circling the outskirts of our domain. If we remain idle, we risk losing more than a single child. We could lose our entire way of life. Commander Wynn has proven kinder than the legends suggest. Please allow him a chance to demonstrate his ability to aid us." The hush that followed was as thick as the crystalline walls around them. Finally, Elder Nalta stroked her staff, then spoke. "So be it, but he must witness the razor scales firsthand if he's to understand what he's up against. Our watchers have reported that a pair lurks in the lower ravine at twilight. If you can repel them without harming our people or laying waste to our territory, we will consider further cooperation." Jackson nodded solemnly. "I will do my utmost. However, I would ask for guidance from your people. I don't want to cause more harm than good by using the wrong tactics." Vero's eyes flicked from Yuno to Jackson. "Yuno may instruct you in the art of star shard resonance. We Kesh use it to channel energy through the crystals that shape our domain. If you can harness even a fraction of that power, you might stand a chance against the razor scale's formidable hides." A faint murmur of surprise ran through the chamber at Vero's words. Teaching star shard resonance to an offworlder was no small matter. Jackson noted the significance but refrained from interrupting. He merely bowed his head in gratitude, conscious that each step forward was a fragile success that could be lost if he erred. Later that afternoon, Yuno led Jackson to a secluded courtyard where an ancient, gnarled tree grew beside a raised platform studded with star shard crystals. A series of runic markings encircled the base, glowing intermittently. Birds, or bird-like creatures, flitted among the branches above, their chirps joining the rhythmic hum that resonated from the crystals themselves. "This is one of our oldest training sites," Yuno explained, stepping onto the platform. "We bring our youth here when they first learn to harmonize with the star shards. The crystals echo our emotional and mental states, allowing us to project energy or even manipulate certain elements. However, this power is highly dependent on focus and intention." Jackson approached the edge of the platform, placing a gloved hand on one of the smaller crystals. He felt a gentle thrumming, like a distant heartbeat. "I can sense it," he murmured, "but I'm not sure how to connect." "Try letting go of your preconceived notions," Yuno said quietly. "We Kesh believe the crystals are living spirits of the planet, an extension of Astron's pulse. If you approach them only as an object or tool, they remain silent. You have to open your mind to the idea that they can respond." Her instructions were deceptively simple, but Jackson found them challenging. He was used to analyzing phenomena through a lens of data and logic. Still, he closed his eyes and tried to empty his thoughts, envisioning himself as just another presence within Astron's grand design. At first, he felt nothing but the normal tension in his muscles from crouching so much of the day in a realm built for smaller inhabitants. Then, a peculiar warmth began to spread through his fingertips. Encouraged, he exhaled slowly, deepening the connection. A faint image flickered in his mind, swirling colors that reminded him of Astron's bioluminescent forests at dusk. He didn't know if he was imagining it or genuinely sensing something. But the longer he focused, the more pronounced the internal hum grew, like a vibrational melody that resonated through his bones. That's it, Yuno whispered, her voice barely above a breath. She placed a small hand on his wrist, and suddenly the warmth intensified. It felt as if a circuit had closed, linking them through the star shard's energy. Her hand was cool to the touch, but behind that coolness was a palpable undercurrent of power. Jackson opened his eyes. Tiny sparks of light danced along the surface of the crystal he was touching. I feel something, he said, his voice hushed. But how do I use it? Yuno stepped closer, her gaze steady. With care. We never bend the crystals to our will through force. We harmonize with them, guiding their natural resonance. Concentrate on how you want that energy to manifest. For instance, if we face the razor scales, we might need defensive fields or concussive blasts. Either requires a focused projection of will. Nodding, Jackson attempted to channel a small burst of energy. The crystal glowed brightly for an instant, then popped with a harmless spark that sent him stumbling back. Yuno let out a startled laugh, catching him by the arm before he could crash into the gnarled tree. Easy, she chided gently, or you'll incinerate half the courtyard by accident. They continued training for what felt like hours, alternating between careful study of the star shard's resonance and short breaks to catch their breath. Jackson found the process mentally taxing, like learning a brand new language while simultaneously performing a balancing act. Yet with Yuno's patient guidance, he made significant progress. By late afternoon, he could produce a gentle wave of energy from the crystals around him. The glow sometimes shimmered in sync with Yuno's own emanations, which fascinated both of them. At one point, Yuno let her hand linger on his arm longer than necessary. They locked eyes, sharing a wordless moment of understanding. It struck Jackson how vulnerable she was, entrusting such knowledge to him, even though she was barely a quarter his height. Yet there she stood, exuding courage and an unwavering desire to protect her people. An unexpected warmth curled through his chest, something more personal than the star shard's energy. They were startled out of this moment by the sudden blast of a horn echoing through the canyon. The deep tone reverberated off the crystal buildings, sending shimmering waves across every reflective surface. Yuno's eyes widened. That's the alarm signal, she said, her voice tense. The watchers must have spotted a razor scale near the outer edge. Jackson felt his adrenaline spike. Without hesitation, he grabbed his gear and followed Yuno toward the upper terraces. Kesh villagers scurried aside to make way, some climbing to vantage points atop crystal spires, while others rushed to secure children inside dome-like huts. The entire village vibrated with fear and determination. Reaching an overlook carved into the canyon wall, Jackson spotted the razor scale, a massive reptilian beast easily his size, if not larger. Its body was encased in glittering plates, each resembling a razor-edged shard of crystal. Iridescent fins flared along its spine, catching the last of the sun's rays in a lethal prism. The creature's head was broad, and its jaws bristled with serrated teeth that could likely snap steel. A second razor scale prowled in the shadows just behind the first. They've never ventured this far into our domain before, Yuno whispered, gripping the stone railing so tightly her knuckles turned pale. We must drive them back before they charge the heart of the village. Jackson scanned the beast's movements. It was sniffing the air, tail lashing, as if sensing either prey or a challenge. You said the star shard resonance might work as both offense and defense. Any chance we can use it from a distance? It's more effective at close range, Yuno answered, a tremor betraying her anxiety. But it's not impossible. If we can concentrate enough energy at once, we might create a barrier to push them away, or at least confuse them long enough for our watchers to launch a countermeasure. The first razor scale let out a roar that made the crystal walls vibrate. A portion of the ledge they stood on cracked, sending chips of stone down the canyon. Yuno gasped, and Jackson steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Focus, he murmured. We've got this. Right, she breathed, cheeks darkening with resolve. I'll link with you through the star shards. Combine our energies. Jackson nodded, recalling the training. Stay calm, envision the desired outcome, and let the crystal's natural current flow through him. But as the razor scales advanced, the gap between theory and reality felt like an enormous chasm. Heart pounding, Jackson closed his eyes, recalling the mental quietude he'd practiced in the courtyard. Slowly, he stretched out a hand until it rested upon a chunk of star shard crystal embedded in the overlook's railing. Yuno pressed her palm against the same crystal, her petite body trembling, but determined. Their shared touch sent a jolt of warmth racing through Jackson's veins, more potent than any moment they'd practiced before. He could almost feel Yuno's heartbeat sync with his own through the star shard resonance. The swirling colors in his mind's eye intensified. Their combined will coalesced into a single focused objective: hold back the razor scales. Sparks of light danced across the crystal. Stray arcs of energy flared around them, causing a few nearby Kesh to duck behind cover. At the edge of the canyon floor, the first razor scale growled low, then charged. Its massive clawed feet sent a thunderous vibration through the ground. Jackson snapped his eyes open. "Now, shoot!" he shouted. Together, he and Yuno channeled their joint energy through the star shard. A shimmering barrier materialized in front of the charging beast, like a translucent wall that reflected the surrounding environment in a fractured prism. The razor scale slammed into it with a teeth-rattling impact, letting out a furious shriek. Its crystalline scales flashed a deep red, reminiscent of molten metal. But the barrier held. Emboldened, the Kesh Watchers launched small projectiles from hand-carved crossbows. Their arrows were tipped with tiny shards of crystal, glowing faintly. They struck the razor scale's tough hide, not piercing deeply but causing it to recoil. The creature scrambled backward, shaking its head as if disoriented. Its companion let out a warning hiss, stepping around to flank the barrier's edge. Jackson grit his teeth, feeling strain in every muscle. Starshard resonance was taxing. He could sense his own energy draining, as if he were sprinting a marathon while simultaneously wrestling a giant. Yuno's brow glistened with sweat, and her hands shook against the crystal. "Push them back," she urged through gritted teeth. "If we press this advantage, they may retreat." Concentrating further, Jackson envisioned the barrier expanding in a wave. He sensed Yuno's will merging with his own, guiding the surge of energy. The translucent field pulsed once, twice, and then rolled outward like a giant tidal force. Both razor scales were caught in the blast, tumbling against boulders in a tumble of screeching limbs and flashing scales. The Watchers fired another volley of crystal-tipped arrows, striking the beast's unprotected flanks. At last, with a cacophony of growls, the razor scales seemed to admit defeat. They scrambled to their feet, tails whipping in frustration, then bounded away from the Kesh domain. The thunder of their retreat gradually faded into the distance. An exhilarated hush fell over the overlook. Kesh villagers emerged from behind columns and walls, staring in wide-eyed amazement at Jackson and Yuno. Tiny cheers began to erupt from pockets of watchers, growing into a resounding chorus of gratitude and relief. Jackson stumbled, the aftershock of using star shard resonance leaving his limbs shaky. Yuno, equally drained, leaned against him, and for a fleeting instant, he was acutely aware of her closeness, her slight frame, her rapid heartbeat echoing his own. Elder Nalta arrived, staff clacking on the crystal floor. Her gaze swept over the scene, the battered canyon, the departing beasts, the fading glow, the protective field. She lifted her staff, commanding silence. "Commander Wynn," she said gravely, "and Yuno, you have done more than drive away the threat. You have shown the Council that cooperation with an outsider is not only possible, but potentially transformative. There is talk among us of a deeper source of power that might banish the razor scales for good, if you are willing to seek it." Yuno's eyes flicked to Jackson, a new spark of hope igniting within them. "I think we're ready to learn more," she murmured. Though her voice trembled with fatigue, Jackson sensed an unbreakable resolve. He too felt it, a conviction that protecting the Kesh was now as important to him as any mission he'd ever undertaken. Evening light bathed the Kesh village in copper and rose hues, catching on the crystal spires and shimmering across the ravine. Jackson stood beside Yuno in the grand chamber once more, though the atmosphere felt distinctly different from their previous meeting with the Council. Where suspicion and fear had once colored every glance, now curiosity and a guarded respect permeated the room. The repelled razor scale attack, accomplished through Jackson and Yuno's combined star shard resonance, had evidently shifted perspectives among many villagers. Yet it was clear the elder still had deeper concerns. "This is not the end of our troubles," began Elder Nalta, raising her staff to quiet the gathered onlookers. "Though you drove away the razor scales for now, the sightings have increased across Astron. If we fail to address the root cause, I fear more attacks will come, and in greater force." The remark drew murmurs from the assembled Kesh. Yuno exchanged a look with Jackson, her small hand brushing the side of his palm. He sensed her desire to protect her people, mingled with a flicker of hope that he might stand with her in a more lasting capacity. Indeed, he felt an almost inexplicable bond with Yuno, a pull that transcended mere fascination. Elder Vero cleared his throat, stepping forward. His stern expression had softened only slightly since their initial confrontation. "Some of our oldest scriptures speak of a phenomenon called the twin flame accord, an advanced form of resonance that can unite two different energies. In the past, it was believed only possible among Kesh partners. But your display of power against the razor scales suggests otherwise." Jackson listened intently, recalling how it had felt when he and Yuno channeled Star Shard energy together, a synergy that made them momentarily inseparable. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to keep your people safe," he said, voice steady. Elder Nalta nodded. "The twin flame accord is more than just an energy technique. It's a bond that merges minds, hearts, and resonance. If successful, it could amplify your Star Shard abilities tenfold. It might even quell the razor scale's aggression at its source, as some texts claim these creatures react to unbalanced crystal energies across Astron. However," she paused, letting the warning hang in the air. "However, it's dangerous," Yuno finished gravely. "If two individuals fail to harmonize perfectly, the backlash can shatter their connection permanently, leaving both drained, or worse." Her gaze flicked to Jackson. Despite her small stature, she seemed to radiate courage. "My people have never attempted the accord with a non-Kesh. You would be the first." A flutter of uncertainty wove through Jackson. The stakes were high, and he could see the fear lingering on some elders' faces. But the alternative, doing nothing, seemed far riskier. He drew a breath, recalling the day he found Yuno unconscious in the forest, the moment she had feared he might devour her, and the unlikely trust that blossomed between them. "We'll do it," he said at last, voice carrying across the crystalline halls. "Show us how." A collective exhalation swept through the chamber. This was not a decision to be taken lightly. Elder Nalta slammed her staff on the floor. "So be it. At dawn, you will travel with Yuno to the Heart Labyrinth, a place where Star Shard energies converge. Only there can the accord be attempted. Prepare yourselves, for the journey and the trial may reveal more than either of you expects." Preparations for the journey began immediately. Word spread through the village that Yuno and Jackson would attempt a mystical bonding, and the Kesh buzzed with excitement, worry, and speculation. Some whispered that Yuno was risking her life for a mere outsider. Others countered that Jackson had proven more compassionate than any giant in their lore. Either way, the entire settlement seemed on edge, as if bracing for whatever outcome fate might deliver. Elder Vero provided Jackson with additional guidance on manipulating resonance at a higher level. He pointed to Star Shard diagrams carved into the dome ceiling, explaining how the labyrinth's crystalline walls would magnify their energies. It was crucial that Jackson maintain clarity of intent and emotional honesty. Any hint of discord could sabotage the ritual. Meanwhile, Yuno spent the evening in quiet meditation, seated before a small altar where a glowing shard hovered in midair. She recited soft prayers and mantras that Jackson couldn't understand, but he recognized the gravity of her devotion. That night, the two found a moment of respite on a high terrace overlooking the ravine. A gentle wind carried the scent of mineral-rich earth and a tapestry of night-blooming flowers. From this vantage, the village's crystal spires were like luminous needles pricking the starlit sky. Jackson leaned on the low stone rail, his mind awash with uncertainties. Would he and Yuno succeed? What if the accord backfired? Would he ever return to his post at the outpost? Or even to Earth? Yuno approached quietly, her bare feet making almost no sound on the crystal tiles. She gazed up at him, her small stature placing her head somewhere near his lower chest. "I want to thank you," she said softly, "for believing in us, believing in me." He turned, offering a slight smile. "If anything, I should be the one thanking you. You taught me a new way of seeing Astron. Before I met you, it was just another frontier to secure. Now I see it as a place with its own soul, kept alive by you and your people. Yuno's eyes shimmered with a deep affection. Stepping onto the terrace's edge, she stood on the tips of her toes, balancing carefully. Even then, she barely reached Jackson's sternum. But she lifted her face, one hand braced on his arm. He felt his heart hammer in his chest as she brushed her lips gently against his. The contact was brief, delicate as a breeze, yet it sent a surge of warmth through him. She pulled back, her cheeks a shade deeper in purple. "I've wanted to do that," she admitted, eyes gleaming, "but I wasn't sure how you'd react. Most Kesh couldn't imagine being so close to someone your size. But my instincts tell me we're walking the right path." Jackson's pulse still raced. He lifted a hand to her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin. "You know," he said softly, "size is relative, as you once told me. In the things that matter, courage, kindness, heart, you're a giant." A hint of a smile curved her lips. "Remember that tomorrow," she whispered, "when the labyrinth tests us. We may see each other in ways neither of us expects." He nodded, swallowing hard. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew he would face them hand in hand with this extraordinary Kesh, determined to forge a bond that might save not just her village, but all of Astron. Dawn broke clear and bright, illuminating the canyon walls in a golden shimmer. Yuno and Jackson set out with only a handful of supplies: water skins, a small ration of energy bars, and a ceremonial shard gifted by Elder Nalta. A band of watchers escorted them as far as the labyrinth's entrance, a yawning cave mouth concealed behind a waterfall at the far end of the ravine. Mist rose in a cool spray as they ducked behind the rushing water, stepping onto slippery stone steps that led down into the darkness. Before entering, Elder Nalta made them pause. She placed her staff on the ground and drew from it a slender rod that flickered with star-shard light. "Take this," she said, handing it to Yuno. "The rod will help you navigate the labyrinth's illusions. However, once you reach the heart chamber, you must rely on your own synergy. The rod cannot complete the accord for you." Yuno accepted the rod with both hands, bowing. The watchers behind them murmured words of encouragement, though Jackson could sense the tension in the air. This was a sacred site, seldom entered even by the Kesh. A hush fell as Yuno and Jackson stepped into the cavern, leaving the watchers behind. The path wound down a gentle slope before opening into a wide corridor lined with stalactites that sparkled like polished glass. Jackson's boots echoed eerily, while Yuno's lighter footsteps made almost no sound. In the dimness, the rod glowed brighter, revealing strange markings etched into the walls, symbols that looped and curled in patterns Jackson couldn't decipher. They hadn't gone far when the corridor branched into 3 tunnels, each identical in appearance. "Is this the labyrinth?" Jackson asked, scanning for any clue about which path to choose. Yuno raised the rod, and its glow pulsed in response to the leftmost tunnel. "This way," she said. "I can feel a slight pull, like the star shards are guiding us." Sure enough, as they ventured deeper, the air took on a resonant hum. Their route twisted and turned through corridors that occasionally opened into small chambers. In one such chamber, a swirling mist obscured the floor, and Jackson had to help Yuno jump across patches of unstable ground. At another junction, bizarre optical illusions made the walls seem to warp and dissolve, forcing them to rely on the rod's steady light to keep their bearings. Strangely, the trek felt both long and short. Time stretched in the darkness, yet their determination propelled them onward. Their closeness became a steady anchor. Jackson found that whenever he felt doubt creeping in, Yuno's presence, her hand sometimes resting on his knee, her arm for balance, centered him. Eventually they arrived at a huge, rounded chamber where stalagmites rose like spires, and star-shard crystals emerged from the walls in a natural lattice. Here, the glow from the rod dimmed, as though overshadowed by a more potent force. The air thrummed with energy, reminding Jackson of the day they'd first practiced resonance. The difference was that this energy felt alive, almost as if the labyrinth itself had been waiting for them. Yuno looked up at him with unwavering resolve. "This must be the heart chamber," she said. "Do you feel it, Jackson? It's like the entire planet's heartbeat is coursing through these crystals." He nodded, placing a hand against a column of star shard. I feel it, he said quietly. Ready to do this together? She exhaled, stepping closer. Let's begin. They stood at the center of the cavern, both palms pressed against a massive crystal formation that curved like a vertical wave. The glow it emitted was gentle yet steady, pulsating at a rhythm that matched Yuno's own breath. Jackson closed his eyes, recalling all that he'd learned. Steady his mind, keep his emotions clear, and synchronize with Yuno's energy. Yuno started a low chant, ancient Kesh words that resonated in the cavern. Each syllable felt like a key turning in a hidden lock, and the star shard responded with a corresponding pulse of light. Gradually, Jackson joined in, albeit clumsily at first, repeating the syllables as best he could. A tingle of static spread across his fingertips, traveling up his arms and centering in his chest. As their voices mingled, a luminescent thread of energy formed between their hands. It started out no thicker than a hair's breadth, but soon expanded into a twisting helix of light. Yuno's face glistened with concentration, her brows knitted tight. Jackson felt like he was teetering on the edge of an immense precipice. One misstep could plunge them into chaos, yet the promise of unity was exhilarating. In a moment of perfect clarity, he felt Yuno's heart, a flicker of warmth and determination that ignited an answering resonance within him. The swirling light around them intensified, forming a cocoon of brilliance. His mind filled with visions, not all of them his own. He glimpsed fleeting images of Yuno's childhood, climbing crystal spires, gathering starlight moss, staring in awe at the midnight skies. He also witnessed her fears, memories of older Kesh warning about colossal predators, about how outsiders might exploit or consume them. Simultaneously, Yuno was flooded with Jackson's memories. His upbringing on Earth, the rigors of special ops training, his first starflight mission, his hopes of forging peaceful connections rather than waging endless conflicts. She saw the heartbreak he carried from losing friends in past campaigns, felt the quiet guilt he bore whenever he couldn't save everyone. These memories collided and merged, forging an intimacy beyond anything they'd experienced. Their joined consciousness reached a crescendo, and the star shard's brilliance soared to a dazzling peak. Jackson sensed a monumental shift happening in the space around them, as though the labyrinth itself was bending to accommodate their union. Suddenly, the light imploded inward, wrapping them in a womb of radiance. The ground seemed to vanish beneath their feet. Jackson's body felt weightless, and he clung to the lifeline of Yuno's energy to maintain equilibrium. Then, with a rush akin to breaching the surface after a deep dive, the light unfurled in a silent burst. When Jackson opened his eyes, he first noticed the swirling motes of light dissolving like fireflies. Then he realized he was standing on solid ground once more, and Yuno's hands were still intertwined with his. But she was different. Instead of peering up from near his waist, Yuno was nearly eye level with him, her lavender skin faintly radiating the star shard's glow. Her Kesh attire had adapted too, shifting in size and shape to fit her new form. A flash of astonishment crossed her face. Jackson, she breathed, her voice richer and just slightly deeper, yet still carrying that musical lilt. I'm as tall as you. He blinked in amazement, then reached out, brushing the hair from her forehead. It felt like stepping into another reality. You really are, he whispered, awestruck. The stories were true. This synergy can alter form. Yuno's new height did not merely reflect a change in stature. An aura of power clung to her, as though she had become a living conduit for the star shard energy. She gazed down at her hands, flexing her fingers, then looked up at Jackson, her bronze-flecked eyes brimming with emotion. He felt her presence keenly, no longer the fragile figure he'd once lifted in his palm, but an equal partner brimming with the same protective instinct he'd long felt for her. Before they could fully absorb the transformation, the cavern around them shuddered. A low rumble echoed through the stone corridors, as if the labyrinth itself were responding to this monumental shift. Jackson instinctively wrapped an arm around Yuno's waist to steady her. The floor vibrated, causing shards of loose crystal to clatter. A sudden roar pierced the darkness. Jackson's blood ran cold. It was the unmistakable cry of a razor scale. But how could it have entered the labyrinth? Another roar followed, closer and more menacing. The rocky walls trembled. Something stirred them, Yuno said, her newfound voice steadying. Despite the potential danger, she exuded a calm resolve. The star shard energies must be attracting them. They can sense the surge of power. Jackson tightened his grip on her. We have to defend ourselves and this place. If the razor scales break through these chambers, it could destroy the labyrinth. He remembered what Elder Nalta had implied. The labyrinth's energies helped keep Astron in balance. If that balance were shattered, the Kesh might lose more than just a sacred site. With a swift nod, Yuno moved. Even adjusting to her new body, she was graceful, her steps sure, each motion purposeful. Together, they navigated back through the corridors, following the direction of the roars. They soon entered a grand cavern that branched off the main heart chamber, a place of towering pillars and a gaping opening in the ceiling that spilled daylight. At the far end, two razor scales were clawing their way inside, scattering debris. Their scales glowed with an ominous crimson sheen, fueled by the labyrinth's energy. One beast locked eyes with Jackson, its fierce gaze flickering to Yuno. A guttural snarl escaped its throat, and it lunged forward, slamming into a pillar. The impact cracked the stone, sending chunks raining down. The second razor scale circled behind the first, growling low as if preparing to flank them. Adrenaline coursed through Jackson, but so did the renewed synergy of star shard resonance. He touched Yuno's hand, exchanging a silent understanding. They would fight as one. No longer was Yuno forced to rely on him to lift her or keep her safe. She now stood at his side, as capable of unleashing star shard power as he was. Together they reached for a large crystal sprouting from the cavern floor, channeling the resonance they had just harnessed in the heart chamber. The vibrations built swiftly, each pulse doubling in intensity. Their energies merged effortlessly, forging a conduit of luminous force that swirled around them like a spectral vortex. With a shared shout, they unleashed a blazing wave of star shard energy, aiming it at the closest razor scale. The wave struck the razor scale head-on, igniting its scales in a corona of refracted light. The creature reeled backward, shrieking as if stung by an invisible swarm of bees. Its companion launched forward in retaliation, massive jaws snapping. Jackson and Yuno pivoted, channeling a second burst of power that slammed into the attacking beast's flank. Even so, the razor scales were no pushovers. Despite the searing energy, they pressed on, their claws ripping through the rocky floor. Remembering their successful tactic from the village, Jackson reached out for more precise manipulation. Focus on the lattice of the crystals, he urged, voice tight with urgency. If we can seal the breach or redirect them. Yuno caught his idea instantly. She glanced upward, noticing an intricate network of star shard formations near the ceiling. With a deep breath, she and Jackson extended their resonance upward, weaving the energy through those crystalline channels. The air crackled with power as the labyrinth itself seemed to respond. Slowly, the shards began to shift, their positions adjusting like puzzle pieces sliding into place. The first razor scale rallied, shaking off the sizzling lines of energy that clung to its scales. Its crimson glow deepened, surging along its spine. Lowering its horned head, it charged once more. Yuno and Jackson braced themselves, intensifying their connection with the overhead crystals. The moment the beast was directly beneath the crystal network, they issued a final mental command. In a rapid cascade, the shards dislodged and plummeted like javelins. A thunderous crash echoed through the cavern as large chunks of star shard hammered the razor scale, pinning it against the rocky floor. It let out a final anguished roar, the glow in its eyes dimming. The second razor scale hissed in alarm, limbs scraping the ground as it tried to back away. But Jackson and Yuno pressed their advantage, channeling another concussive force that drove the beast away from the heart chamber. Fear flickered across its reptilian gaze, and it turned, loping off through the labyrinth's corridor. Breathing heavily, Jackson looked to Yuno. Sweat matted her now shoulder-length lavender hair, and her chest rose and fell with each ragged breath. Yet the moment their eyes met, a potent sense of unity welded them together. In those few minutes of combat, they had fought with a synchronicity that surpassed any training regimen. "Are you all right?" he asked, wiping perspiration from his brow. Yuno nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, but we should ensure that second one truly fled." It might regroup and return or find another route. The labyrinth must remain intact. If any more razor scales have broken through, we could be in danger. Just then, a familiar voice echoed from behind them. Jackson, you know! They turned to see Elder Vero along with half a dozen Kesh watchers carefully stepping into the cavern. Vero's gaze fell upon the subdued razor scale pinned beneath broken shards, and his eyes widened in astonishment. We felt the labyrinth quake from above and feared the worst. But, by the crystals, you've done it. Jackson motioned to the corridor where the second beast had fled. One escaped. We can track it. Vero shook his head. That may not be necessary. If it's wounded and senses your power, it's unlikely to return. The important question is, did you complete the twin flame accord? Yuno hesitated, glancing at Jackson. A secretive smile touched her lips as she looked down at herself. Taller, stronger, still buzzing with star shard energy. We did, and it changed me in ways we didn't fully anticipate. Vero exhaled, relief mingling with awe. Then it seems the labyrinth has chosen to bind your destinies more deeply than we imagined. They returned to the village in a hush of reverence. Word of Yuno's transformation spread like wildfire, and crowds gathered around the courtyard where the pair emerged from the canyon-side entrance. Kesh of all ages gawked at Yuno, marveling that she now stood shoulder to shoulder with Jackson. In hushed tones, some spoke of prophecies, others whispered of new beginnings. Elder Nalta greeted them in the grand chamber, eyes shining with what might have been tears. The twin flame accord was once thought to be a legend, rarely achieved, and never with an off-worlder. But you have proved that boundaries can be crossed when hearts and wills align. Your synergy has not only secured our village, but also opened doors we never knew existed. Yuno clasped Jackson's hand, her expression resolute. We fought side by side against the razor scales and found that together our bond is more powerful than any threat Astron can throw at us. If you'll permit it, we'd like to solidify this alliance between our peoples. Formally. The elders exchanged glances. Then Elder Nalta's lips curved in a gentle smile. We Kesh have a custom to honor such unity. It involves an oath sealed before our entire community, a pledge to stand together in harmony, no matter the challenges ahead. At that, Yuno's cheeks turned a deeper shade of lavender, but she stood firm. We call it a life binding. It's akin to what humans might consider a permanent vow, marriage in your language. Only here, it's also woven with star shard resonance. It's not just a bond between two individuals, but a covenant that ties them into the broader tapestry of Kesh society. Jackson felt his heart lurch. The gravity of her words sank in, echoing through his mind. Life binding. They had known each other mere days or weeks. He'd lost track in the flurry of events. But the intensity of their connection ran deeper than any conventional timeline. Still, was he ready to be bound to this planet, this culture? To Yuno, he gazed into her bronze-flecked eyes, recalling how she had once feared he might devour her, only to become his closest ally, his guide in a realm he'd never known. Their synergy had unleashed a power that not only vanquished a deadly threat, but also reshaped their very beings. He recalled how easily their minds had melded in the labyrinth, each discovering the other's deepest regrets, hopes, and dreams. Slowly, he squeezed her hand. I've never been more certain of anything, he said, voice thick with emotion. I came to Astron expecting to file reports and maintain security protocols. Instead, I found something worth dedicating my life to. A hush fell over the chamber, and a radiant joy seemed to spark among the onlookers. Elder Vero, once so skeptical, nodded his approval. Then let the life-binding ceremony commence at the next rising of the twin moons. It will be a day we celebrate not only a personal bond, but a new era for our people. In forging this unity, perhaps we can expand our horizon beyond fear, welcoming allies rather than dreading giants. As if on cue, a chorus of shimmering tones emanated from the crystal walls, a sign that the star shards approved as well. Yuno turned to Jackson, a smile curving her lips. He bent down, pressing his forehead against hers, the new closeness allowed by her transformed height, making the gesture all the more intimate. The path ahead was as uncharted as the swirling cosmos that had first brought him here, but for the first time in his life, Jackson felt supremely confident. He was no longer just a soldier or a stranger on an alien world. He was part of a grander union, woven together in star-shard light. Looking back on this journey, I'm struck by how genuine courage and heartfelt empathy can bridge even the widest divides. Watching a tiny Kesh, once terrified of becoming a human's next meal, grow into an equal partner to fight cosmic threats reminds me that hope and unity can thrive in the unlikeliest of places. The fusion of star-shard resonance with unwavering devotion opened a door to endless possibilities for both species. It's a powerful lesson. When individuals from vastly different worlds choose trust over fear, monumental change can happen. I hope this story inspires you as much as it did me. What do you think about the Kesh and their crystal magic? Feel free to leave your thoughts, questions, and theories in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. I'd love to hear your opinions and ideas on how such alliances could shape the future of this vibrant universe.